Hello and welcome to another video. In this one, I'll be discussing 3 possible scenarios for this upcoming Ukrainian offensive, setting up the setting for this upcoming scenario. So first off, where will it take place? For that, we'll have to assume it is Zaporizhzhia for the sake of this video, and that is because that is what has been advertised for the past half a year. There are multiple scenarios that could replace this strategy and get out an outcome that is similar, or like it could add to the value of the current situation. However, the issue with them is that they are too many and too detailed and too speculative to consider. What is clear and easy is this one scenario that has been discussed for a very, very long time. So, what is the current situation by the Zaporizhzhia front? If we look at the manpower of each side, there is about an equal force on this part of the front line, according to my information. So Russia has fortified this location by building heavy trench networks, as well as other fortifications, anti-tank concrete structures, bunkers, and so on. So generally, the Russian forces have a lot of defenses prepared, and at the same time, they've built up the number of troops who are in this location, not just with Russian armed forces, but also with DPR and LPR soldiers, as well as Wagner PMC being sent to this part of the front line. As for the Ukrainian side, they have the usual units, and then they have this up and coming 48,000 strong offensive force, which has been trained as well as equipped by NATO. So they'll have fully NATO equipment and fully NATO training. However, it is limited NATO training as they have had limited time. Their training consists of a few months of training, after which they're sent to the front line, or in this case, they are sent to these build-up locations in Dnipro and Poltava and so on, where they have been training further with the equipment that they've received until their deployment day, which is closing in. And I say that because the Ukrainian defense minister announced today that according to him, according to the data he has and everything, the information he has available as defense minister of Ukraine, they are now completely ready. And the location as well as the time of the offensive will depend on the situation on the front line, or so he says. So essentially, they're waiting for the mud to dry up. And looking at the weather conditions, we can see from tomorrow onwards, it's going to be sun and only sun for the whole week. And offensive is estimated to take about 5 days. So if it starts on Thursday, they can finish by Monday. So essentially, we will be seeing the Ukrainian forces launch an offensive soon, as they are now ready for it. And they're just waiting for the mud to dry, so that they can actually drive their tanks. So the current situation is that the Russian and Ukrainian forces are about equal in strength, as the forces on the front line are equal, and the amount of troops that they can relocate is, however, unequal. And I say that because Ukraine has this strong force of 48,000 troops. However, Russia has only deployed half of their mobilized forces. That is a force of 300,000 people, 300,000 soldiers, of which 150,000 are sent to the front line, and that is according to the latest information by Putin in late January. So according to that information, Russia has 150,000 troops in reserve. So that puts it at a 3-to-1 advantage for the Russian forces. Now, will Russia be able to mobilize 150,000 troops from their training stations or their real locations to the front line within a couple of hours? Definitely not. However, they most likely have a bunch of forces prepared in the rear of the front line, specific to Zaporizhzhia, and probably a force matching that of the Ukrainian forces, so about 50,000 troops, of which additional reinforcements can come with time, according to where the Ukrainian forces will launch their offensive. So if we assume there are 3 parts of the front line, Luhansk, Donetsk, and Zaporizhzhia, then if the Russian forces have 50k on each of these, then if the Ukrainians launch an offensive here, then they'll be able to, at the very least, try their best to reach a stalemate, after which forces from the other two areas could reinforce or launch their own offensives, which would put pressure on the Ukrainian army. So that is the situation, that is the setting. Now let's go to the scenarios. So I've planned out 3 different scenarios. So the 3 scenarios that I'll be discussing is number 1, a complete Ukrainian failure of this offensive. Number 2, a complete success of the Ukrainian offensive. And the third option, which is a stalemate. The first scenario is a complete failure of the Ukrainian offensive. So in this scenario, there's a lot of things that go wrong for the Ukrainian forces. First of all, the equipment that the West has sent to Ukraine is faulty or very difficult to learn. So the Ukrainian forces who have been taught and trained to use them do not use them to their full capability. And at the same time, these equipments have been modified to prevent the latest technology of the NATO army to fall into Russian hands. Therefore, the technology, the electronics and so on are of lower quality than what it's supposed to be. So the effectiveness of these equipment is less than they are supposed to. And the training of the soldiers is less than what it's supposed to be. At the same time, the Ukrainian air defense has degenerated to the point where the Russian forces have complete air superiority over the whole front line. And the Russian forces would have developed the 1,500 FAB bombs. And at the same time, the Russian forces are completely prepared by the front line, and they have proper amounts of reserves in the rear in proper places, and the supply lines are properly protected and effectively used. So after an initial Ukrainian attack in the 3 locations of Polohy, as well as Tokmak and Vasilivka, the Russian forces rapidly respond and react to that by pushing the Ukrainians back behind their current positions, meeting the Ukrainians in the field and completely obliterating them with their air power and artillery superior and their superior firepower. And they make use of this scenario to launch an offensive elsewhere, either in the Donetsk or in the Luhansk regions, catching the Ukrainian forces completely off guard, and maybe even launching a flanking maneuver to cut off the supplies of the Ukrainian forces launching their offensive. So in this scenario, the Russian forces are completely prepared for a Ukrainian offensive. They react to it instantly with proper forces, and they have properly falsified the front line and their defensive positions, which gives them a huge advantage to push back the Ukrainian forces. And in this scenario, the Russian forces just completely obliterate the Ukrainian forces launching their offensive. And at the same time, the weather just turns horrible as soon as the offensive begins. Rain starts falling, and the Ukrainian NATO tanks get stuck in the mud, become sitting ducks for the Russian forces. In this scenario, the Ukrainian army just gets completely obliterated. All of the support for Ukraine drains. The civilian support for the war, for continuing fighting for a better peace deal, collapses, and they begin requesting Zelensky to offer peace deals to Russia in favor of peace rather than continuing the fight, as he completely loses any hope of continuing the war. And the Russian forces launch their own offensive now that they have obliterated the Ukrainian offensive force, giving them a huge advantage. This scenario has about 20% chance of happening. Then we have the second scenario, the scenario where the Ukrainian forces have utter success in their offensive. If we imagine right now, we have some factors that are decided and some that are undecided. We know how many troops the Ukrainians have, we know that the Russian forces are matching them, and we know that the firepower is in Russia's favor. However, with this offensive army being formed, they could match the Russian firepower, possibly. However, the Russian forces have air superiority. So in this scenario, we have to assume that the recently acquired Ukrainian air defense from NATO countries will also be used in this offensive, which would limit the Russian use of air power in this offensive. Then we have to assume that the Ukrainian forces are able to match the Russian firepower, which currently, in general, on the front line is 7-1 in advantage of the Russian forces. And then we have to imagine that the Ukrainians will catch the Russians off guard. And we have to imagine that the Ukrainians have properly sabotaged Russian supply lines to prevent reinforcements from properly arriving to the front line. So that is a lot of things that have to go in Ukraine's favor. Then on top of that, we have to assume that the weather will be perfect for the whole duration of the offensive. And finally, we have to assume that the Ukrainian plan and equipment are all perfectly prepared. In this scenario, the Ukrainian forces, they launch their offensive in the direction of Melitopol, and they will be launching the offensive in a three-pronged attack towards Vasilivka, towards Tokmak, and towards Polohy. In this scenario, the Russian forces are caught off guard either by not being prepared properly, or not being properly supplied, or even being caught in the middle of a rotation. In this scenario, the Russian forces are unprepared and are caught off guard, and when the initial Ukrainian offensive starts, they are being pushed back and they have to abandon their forward positions. The Ukrainian forces manage to break through and reach the secondary defensive line of the Russian forces, which is around Vesele. They reach Melitopol from the north and northeast, and they move down south toward Berdyansk to cut off the supplies between Mariupol and Melitopol. Then they move to encircle Melitopol from attacking from the east, as well as moving westwards, combining this with a naval assault from the western part of the Dnipro River. And with their forces rapidly pushing, they also launch heavy drone strikes on the whole front line, cutting off Enerhodar nuclear power plant, as well as reaching the coastline by the north of Crimea, cutting off the Russian forces from their own supply lines. And at the same time, as soon as they reach the coastline by the Sea of Azov, they also launch rocket strikes towards the Kerch Bridge to cut off the supplies to Crimea, starving Crimea from all supplies by cutting off the line bridge here to the north and destroying the Kerch Bridge by missile strikes from the south. In this scenario, Crimea is completely cut off from supplies. The Ukrainian forces deploy heavy defenses west of Mariupol to hold their line and their newly acquired territories. And they starve out the Russian forces both in Crimea and in the Kherson region, as they've cut them off by encircling Melitopol from the east and cutting off Melitopol by taking Berdyansk further east of that location. So in this scenario, everything goes well for Ukraine, and the weather is great, the Russians are unprepared, the NATO training is very effective, and the equipment that they have sent is very effective. What do I think is the likelihood of this scenario? I think it has a 10% chance of happening. This scenario is only possible if all of the stars align for the Ukrainians, and it is just meant to be. The Russians completely suck at warfare and are unable to learn from their mistakes. The corruption is rampant, and there's nothing to be done. For the Russian army, they will eventually lose the whole war due to their incompetence. Then we have the final scenario, which is the third one, and that is a stalemate. So in this scenario, we see that the Ukrainian forces and the Russian forces are about matching. The Ukrainians have a slight advantage in firepower, and they have proper air defense technologies to prevent proper air superiority by the Russian forces, but they do not completely negate the Russian Air Force. In this scenario, the Ukrainian forces who have been trained in the use of the Western weapons have been trained properly. They're able to use them to their full potential. The NATO training of Ukrainian troops has been very effective, and the Ukrainian troops have great coordination and are able to cooperate on a large scale, which this will be with a 48,000 strong army. And at the same time, these 48,000 strong offensive force are coupled with an equally large force of foot soldiers who are able to protect the flanks of this offensive force. So in this scenario, the Ukrainian forces will attack these positions. The Russian forces are not caught off guard. They are able to rapidly respond. The Ukrainian forces have somewhat decreased the effectivity of Russian supply lines. However, the Russian forces are still able to bring reinforcements, especially to the flanks, to help protect the Russian defensive lines. They have properly prepared a secondary defensive line. The Ukrainian forces breached the first line in some places and fail to do so in other places, which allows Russia to rapidly reinforce the breaches and are able to hold the first defensive line. The Ukrainian forces do not take too many losses as they're able to properly defend their flanks, and they have many drones to launch at Russian artillery and tank positions. But at the same time, the Russian forces with the Russian Air Force being able to bomb the Ukrainian positions, they're still taking somewhat heavy losses. With this scenario, the Ukrainian forces see that there is not much to be gained in this offensive, and they pull back fairly early and think of a different scenario of which they can make proper use of their forces, and they end up retreating to their prior positions without taking too many losses, so that they're able to hold their line after this failed offensive and reinforce the flanks of the whole front line, preventing any future Russian offensive on other parts of the front line through this scenario. In this scenario, the public opinion doesn't completely fail. Western media makes up excuses as to why it failed. They make up the idea that it didn't take place in the first place. Public support decreases as no results are to be seen, and Ukraine opens up for some sort of peace deal. However, they continue negotiating and they continue holding the front line as they try their best to gain a better standing on the front line, which would give them an opportunity to get a proper peace deal, one that they're okay with, not one that gives up territorial demands. However, that is a discussion for a different time. That is going to be all for this video. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.